Thank you for tuning in to the Postmodern Realities podcast, brought to you by the Christian Research Institute and the Christian Research Journal. I'm Melanie Cogdill, managing editor of the Christian Research Journal. It's July 2024, and you're listening to episode 401, which is a conversation about the nature of truth and how it works. On this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Doug Groothius, who is Distinguished University Research Professor of Apologetics and Christian Worldview at Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He is the author of 15 books, including Christian Apologetics, 2nd edition. Doug has written an article for the Christian Research Journal, and his article is called How Truth Works, and you can read it for free at our website, equip.org. That's EQUIP.org. Doug, it's good to have you on the podcast again.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So we're talking about truth today and what that word means and how it works. And one of the things that Doug focuses on in his article is just how people who are social media influencers are talking about truth and influencing people to think about truth. Now, some people might not know what a social media influencer is, and it's somebody who has become famous for just being on the internet. And before that didn't exist, it was movie stars or athletes or politicians, people like that. And now it's everyday people who started a YouTube channel or started a TikTok account or Instagram account in a particular area of interest. And now they have become really well known because they have millions of followers and dispense their opinions, including statements about quote unquote truth. And then add on to that, just the idea now these days out there of what is called my truth as being truth. And so how would you say that these social media influencers are really confused about the idea of truth and what that word even means?
Right. Well, there are a lot of confusions about this. I wrote a book back in 2000 called Truth Decay that was about postmodernism and a critique of postmodernism, and argued that Christians should not adopt that kind of philosophy. But sadly, almost 25 years later, we still have to deal with this problem of relative truth. And I started out my essay by quoting a woman named Catherine Mayer, who recently became the CEO of National Public Radio. And she did a TED Talk in 2022. I want to read a little bit of this because I think this encapsulates or distills the main problem that people have. So she says, perhaps four our most tricky disagreements, seeking the truth and seeking to convince others of a truth, might not be the right place to start. In fact, our reverence for truth might be a distraction that's getting in the way of finding common ground and getting things done. Well, there's a problem right there because we really should have a reverence for the truth. We should try to find what is true, what is the case, what the facts are, irrespective of our own desires, our own prejudices, and so on. But let me keep reading. She says, now that is not to say that truth doesn't exist, nor is it to say that the truth isn't important. Clearly, the search for truth has led us to do great things, to learn great things. And one of the things that we could all acknowledge is that part of the reason we have such glorious chronicles to the human experience in all forms of culture is because we acknowledge there are many different truths. I'm certain that the truth exists for you and probably for the person sitting next to you, but this may not be the same truth. So we all have different truths. What she's saying is the truth is really a matter of relative perception or relative conviction. Now, if she means that different people know different truths, That's not controversial. I know a fair number of truths about philosophy, probably more than the person that delivers my mail. And the person that delivers my mail knows a whole lot more about mail and the postal service than I do. But we don't get to own truth. That is, I don't have my truth in the way that I have a dog who's sitting next to me. That's my dog, right? He's my possession, although I think he thinks that I'm his possession. But you don't get to own truth. Truth is something that is out in the world. And the best way of understanding truth is that a statement is true if and only if it corresponds or matches or agrees with reality. So in various contexts, in various places, settings, we make what are called truth claims. So if I make the claim that God exists, that is a truth claim. If I sneeze, that's not a truth claim. If I ask you a question, does God exist? Or did Jesus rise from the dead? Those statements are not truth claims, but they are desiring a true answer. Now, the problem with what Miss Mayer says, and so many other people say when they talk about your truth, my truth, is that they are trying to make truth a possession of individuals, and you possess it somehow simply by believing it or simply by having a conviction about something. But what we need to do is really try to seek the truth about the most important questions, about religion and morality and politics and the state of our soul and so on. And there are a lot of different perspectives on God, religion, morality, the nature of the human person. But if they contradict each other, they cannot all be true, because there are two basic facts here. One is that truth is independent of our statements about truth. A true statement is what corresponds to reality. And then second, contradictory truth claims cannot both be true. So very basically, if one person says Jesus Christ is the way to God and the only way, and the other person says no, Jesus is not the only way to God, then those cannot both be true. We've got to get busy and figure out which one is in fact true, because that's such a significant and consequential claim. But a lot of people, especially as you mentioned, media influencers, are much better at learning how to influence people and get followers and get likes than they are on getting clear about A, what truth means, and then B, giving good reason and evidence that what they're saying is in fact true.
As I mentioned last week, we had a huge milestone. We reached 400 episodes after 8 years of podcasting, and we have just covered so many topics that I want to encourage you to go back and look at the back catalog. We have so much that you would be interested in. And because we cover apologetics, cultural apologetics, and Christian living and theology, our content is not dated. Now, you might think, well, you covered this movie or this TV series and it was 3 or 4 years ago, or maybe even 5 or 6 years ago, or all the way back to episode 1 when we talked about the films of Quentin Tarantino from a Christian apologetic viewpoint. Well, I don't think that it is dated, because so much of these kinds of shows and films and books really live on because of the internet. I mean, we've seen some huge shows that were broadcast on TV more than 10 years ago this past summer reach over 1 billion views once they hit Netflix. So you just never know. People are rewatching things from a long time ago, and some of the most favorite and beloved series, even of 30 years ago, are so popular. So you will come across people who have watched all of the Star Trek series or any of the older Star Wars movies or the current content that's out there. So I think that all of our content is relevant and continues to be relevant in terms of Christian apologetics and using that as a springboard to talk about the truths of Christianity when we are thinking about truth today in our episode. And so I encourage you, if you're a newer listener and have just discovered us in the last year, that you've got 7 other years to listen to some of our back content and discover those articles on our website, equip.org. And the neat thing now is everything is completely free. We're no longer a subscription-based podcast. But because of that, as I say every week, we would love it if you could give us your time in just getting the word out, letting people know, casually, informally, telling them about this podcast, or specifically on your social media feeds, providing links to some of your favorite episodes or articles that you found interesting. So thank you for being a partner with us by downloading this episode. I mean, the more people that download it, it helps us see that people are interested in this content, and we want to keep bringing it to you every week. And so now back to my conversation with Doug, which I think is extremely relevant because the idea of my truth is so popular right now with the younger generations, or really people of all ages, because people are living on the internet and they really are influenced by everyday people who have had a big following just by being on the internet. So back to the conversation with Doug. Well, I think some of those influencers would say, and even maybe their followers, especially in the younger generation, I would say like Gen Z and younger, so maybe younger than 30, would really have a problem with what you just said. Because you said a true statement corresponds to reality. And they would say, well, this is my reality. And therefore, this is my truth. This is my experience. And so I think that resonates a lot with young people who want authenticity. And that helps them understand what reality is for them and their quote unquote truth based on their experience. And that's really important to them, because I think that one reason why some of these people are social media influencers is because suddenly an average person is famous and people can relate to them. And so they look to them for advice about life, not just whatever product they're endorsing. They kind of think, well, this person thinks like me, and this is what they're saying their truth is. And I resonate with that because I've seen that in my own life. So can you really define what truth is? Because I think there would be pushback from younger people on what you just said, that a true statement corresponds to reality, because they would say, this is my reality.
Yeah. Well, that's significant. We all have different experiences and different opinions about life, about ourselves, and so on. And we should be courteous and respectful to people's perspectives and the various situations that they have lived through, certainly. But if you're making a claim about something outside of yourself, then you're making a claim about facts. And as Ben Shapiro likes to say, facts don't care about your feelings. So it may be a fact that when you go into a physician, that you have a very serious physical problem. You might have a disease that requires being treated. You may feel fine. Some people, don't want to make the hypochondriacs feel terrible here, but sometimes people feel fine. They go in for a checkup and they discover they've got a serious problem that has to be treated. So if they say, well, my truth is that I feel fine, I'm healthy, there's no problem. Well, that's not the truth. That's not the way things really are. That's not the facts of the matter. So we really should try to find what is real, not just how we feel about something or our perspective on it, but what holds up. What is there when all the opinions and all the feelings fade away? What is still there? So obviously we have some very basic things like, is the earth flat or round? And they cannot both be true. I had a student many years ago when I was trying to explain the concept of truth. And I said, cultures can be wrong, because there were cultures who believed that, to change the image a little bit, that the sun rotated around the earth and not the earth rotating around the sun, which we know is true. objectively the case? And the student said, no, it was true that the sun went around the earth before people changed their mind. I said, really? You know, they both can't be true. Neither can the statement the earth is flat be true and the statement the earth is round be true. So when we have contradictory statements about states of affairs, then we need to get into the realm of epistemology, or trying to verify or falsify truth claims. So what I'm saying is not any kind of a slight against people's experience or against their freedom of speech or freedom of religion or anything like that, but freedom of speech and freedom of religion should be used to try to pursue what is true, not just multiply opinions or multiply perspectives.
So you talk in your article just about, you give some examples of different statements. And so if we think about written statements that people make, you talk about sentences, and you say this in your article: although all sentences communicate something, not all of them aim directly at truth. So what do you mean by that? How do sentences relate to truth?
Yes, what has to do with the different things that are communicated in sentences. So you think of grammar, you have indicative statements like, I am 67 years old. You have interrogative statements. How old is Melanie? How old is Doug Groothius? How old is Joe Biden? Those are requests for truth. You also have statements that are called imperatives, which are commands or injunctions. So if I say, please give me a drink of water, or would you please take my dog for a walk? Those are requests or imperatives. So strictly speaking, only indicative statements make claims on reality. So a question asks something about reality, but it doesn't actually affirm anything positive. And a command wants something to occur, to exist in reality, but it's not actually a description of what is happening. And also, we have exclamatory remarks like wow, or yuck, or gross, or something like that. And those are more reports of our emotional states than they are direct indication of what reality is. Now, in all these cases, you're still dealing with factual matters. So if I ask a question, I'm asking for a fact. If I want something done, I'm asking for something to become a fact. And even if I'm exclaiming or making an emotive utterance, you can still say, did Doug say yuck? Or what did he express when he said yuck? What was he saying yuck about? So all of these sorts of statements, even if they're not directly indicative statements, are still in the neighborhood of truth claims, and they still relate to what we take to be reality in one way or the other.
So one of the things that you mention in your article, you talk about something called antithesis, and you say the logic of truth understood as correspondence to reality, that is how truth works or should work in our set of beliefs. So what is antithesis, and why is it important for truth and falsity?
Mm-hmm. Well, antithesis has to do with the idea that if you make a constructive statement, just call that P, any statement, that what denies it or what opposes it or what contradicts it cannot also be true. So, if P and non-P are antithetical, then they can't both be true. And the alternative to this would be trying to synthesize opposing or contradictory statements, and that can't be done. You can synthesize a collection of statements that are all true. You can, like the four Gospels, we have a lot of different reports of the life of Jesus, but when we do our best scholarship, we find that there's no real contradiction. You just have a perspective given by each Gospel writer and they can be synthesized. So we have things like harmonies of the Gospels. I own several of those. Now, maybe it's hard to harmonize all that or get the chronological order just right, sure, but you can't synthesize contradictions. You have to choose one or the other, or it could be that both of them are false. But what happens, and Francis Schaeffer pointed out this a long time ago, is that when it comes to matters of spirituality and values, people often try to synthesize irreconcilable ideas. They say, well, there is no objective antithetical truth. We can have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And why can't we synthesize? Or why can't we somehow harmonize Christianity and Buddhism, or Christianity and Islam, or something like that? But if you've carefully stipulated what the truth claim is, its denial cannot also be true. Now, there are lots of different truths, but all truths will necessarily agree with each other because truth is one. Reality cannot contradict itself. So that's what I mean by antithesis.
So you also talk about necessary truth and contingent truth. So what is a necessary truth as opposed to a contingent truth?
Yes, this is something that is called modal logic. It can get very complicated, but we don't have to get that complicated. And I'm no great master of modal logic, but it has to do with whether something might or might not be true, or whether it must be true. So if a statement must be true, a truth claim, that means it cannot be false. So, example, a triangle has 3 sides. Well, that defines what a triangle is. So it's not a possibly true statement. It's not, well, probably triangles have 3 sides, or it's not even a general statement. Most triangles have 3 sides. No, all triangles have 3 sides, because that's definitionally the case. You can also talk about the basic laws of logic, such as the law of non-contradiction, which I've appealed to earlier without stating it. It's that a statement and its contradiction cannot both be true in the same way and in the same respect and at the same time. So this is not a generally true statement or a statement that could be true, could be false. It's necessarily true. And these necessary truths are really at the foundation of our knowledge, of our structure of knowing. So we use the law of non-contradiction, if we're thinking well, to test truth claims. And when we come to things like basic definitions, triangle has 3 sides, a bachelor is an unmarried man, we come to basic mathematical truths like the multiplication table. These are set. These are facts of reality that you really can't dispute unless you've lost your mind or you're joking. Now, there are other truths that are called contingent truths, and they're no less true than necessary truths, but they have a different modality, which simply means we could imagine them as false. So let's take something like my father passed away in a plane crash in 1968 when he's 40 years old. That's sadly true. But we can imagine a world in which that didn't happen. And I do, as a man who lost his father when he was young. I think, well, what would it have been like if Dad had lived longer? What kind of relationship would we have had? Now, I can think about that, not because it's true, but because it's possibly true. Now, I can't think at all, or at least coherently, if I deny the law of non-contradiction, or if I start trying to get creative with the multiplication table, because those things are necessary truths. So that's how that plays out. And this is important for apologetics because we want to build an apologetic system on a solid and coherent epistemology. So we need necessary truths in the foundation of our epistemology. But there are a lot of Christian claims that are not necessary truths, but they are true. And we have good reason, good and sufficient and adequate reasons for believing in them, like the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. When you read 1 Corinthians 15, Paul entertains the possibility that Christ did not rise from the dead, and he runs what's called the counterfactual. So if Christ didn't rise from the dead, then our faith is in vain, we're deceiving people, and we're the most miserable of all sinners, right? But of course, he doesn't believe that. And in 1 Corinthians 15 and throughout the Gospels and the book of Acts, we find superb evidence that, in fact, in history, Christ did rise from the dead, victorious over sin and Satan and death itself. But when you talk about contingent truths, you have to do some investigation to verify them because it's an open question. Now, that's not to say that Christianity is just a collection of probabilities and no one can really know anything about history. I'm not going down the skeptical route at all. Just making the distinction here that we work with necessary truths that are in the foundation of our knowledge, and then we have certain contingent truths of history or psychology or sociology that require some investigation.
So, thinking about that, I would like to ask you a question because out there on social media, of course, a few years ago, as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about statements that normally we would think are true, like mathematical problems. And then several years ago, there was a whole debate on Twitter, but it's X now, I guess. And someone wrote, the idea of 2 plus 2 being 4 is cultural because it is, out of a Western imperialistic colonization mindset. And we think of it as the only way of knowing. But if we think of things outside of it, so they were saying, if we think of things outside of a Western construct, would we really believe that 2 plus 2 is 4? Here's some ways that maybe 2 plus 2 is not 4. And it's really a cultural statement, not a truth statement. How does the Christian apologist deal with that when these are some of the things that are being pushed back on social media?
Right. I wrote about that a bit in my book, Truth Decay, and I also deal with it to some extent in my book, Fire in the Streets. And the idea is that there are oppressive ideologies, and these ideologies depend on things like basic logic, linear thinking, and objectivism in mathematics. So if we're going to throw off the oppressive ideology perpetrated by white male Christians, mostly straight, heteronormative people, to use their phrase, then we have to just uproot it completely. So if you're going to be on the side of the oppressed and you want people to be liberated, then you have to completely destroy everything involved in this oppressive ideology and narrative, including basic logic, basic argument forms, and even basic mathematics. I'll give you an example of this. I was listening to National Public Radio a few years ago, and a commentator was saying the idea of objective truth is racist. And I thought, well, there's an objective truth claim right there. So this person is contradicting herself. And of course, the idea of objective truth is racist. The idea that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is not racist. These are just rules for thought. And rules for thought cannot be racist or oppressive. And moreover, there are different ways of symbolizing mathematics. You can use Roman numerals, you can use Arabic numerals, but you mean the same thing. There's a reference. It's actually to a proposition. So there are ways of symbolizing numbers and ways of symbolizing truth claims that differ. I can say Paul was an apostle in English. You can say that in French. You could say it in Swahili. But you're still saying and affirming the same thing once you translate. And I didn't deal with this in my article, but this gets to the heart of something called propositions. A proposition is what a statement affirms. So there are propositions behind the statement, Paul was an apostle, whether you say that in French or English or Swahili or some other language. But the people that claim that basic mathematics, basic logic, or a linear conception of life is somehow racist and oppressive are really just wrong on a fundamental level. They can't live and think that way. And also, I point this out in my book, Fire in the Streets, this is disempowering to people who have struggled to find a voice and to succeed in society, because the way to come up from being disadvantaged or oppressed is by thinking well, reading, speaking well, learning basic skills, mathematics, showing up on time, having a linear approach to history. This is exactly what people like Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King advocated. It's not, well, throw away everything associated with Western society and somehow we can find liberation. No, that would just immiserate people because you're denying reality, objective verity, and then you're also castigating the kind of skills that everybody needs to succeed in life, such as basic mathematics, basic logic. I'd include their grammar, spelling. We need that. It's not a matter of these things are white or oppressive or Western. They are realities and skills that we need to communicate, to get along, and to advance.
Something you also talk about in your article is elusive truth. So you write about that. What is elusive truth?
Well, we're finite beings, and we can't do everything. We can't know everything. That's part of who we are as creatures. So I divide this into 4 categories. One is some truth is not knowable by mortals, although all truth is known by God. God is omniscient. So in some cases, we can make approximations. We can talk about possibilities. One example would be no one knows when Jesus will return, although God knows that. There are a lot of mysteries in life. We often don't understand why God allows certain evils in the world, but we can know that God is all good and all powerful, and he will bring good out of evil. We can give a strong apologetic for that. But for any particular evil, in my own case, such as my first wife, Becky's demise from dementia and her death, I can't give you a nice, neat explanation for that, but I can put that suffering and struggle into the Christian story, the true story of creation, fall, and redemption. And you can know that the Christian worldview in the Bible is true, but there's still a lot of things that we simply cannot know because we are mortals, and also we are fallen mortals. So our reasoning can be corrupted by selfishness. We could be intellectually lazy, etc. Now, second, there's some truths that are unknown, not because they are unknowable to us, but because one has not adequately pursued them. So I recently moved to Lowell, Michigan from 31 years in Denver, Colorado. And there are a lot of things I don't know about Lowell, Michigan. I'm trying to find out what the best restaurants are, the restaurants that have patios so I can take my dog who's suffering separation anxiety. I had to figure out the best internet services, where it would be good for my wife and I to attend church, snow removal services. Now, these are things that I don't yet know, but with some effort, I could know them. There are some things that we just cannot know because we are finite and fallible and sinful mortals. There are other things that we could know. We just don't know them yet. All right. And then a third category is some truths are unavailable because we lack the skill, capacities, or ability to acquire the knowledge. So I could learn a bit more about mathematics. You know, I've got the 2 + 2 = 4 down pretty well. I've got the multiplication table down pretty well. But my knowledge in mathematics is very limited. So it's far more limited than, let's say, really gifted mathematicians like John Lennox or William Dembski. I simply can't attain to that level, but people are more skilled and they can. And then fourthly, time also limits our knowledge. Anybody who's crammed for a test in college or high school or anywhere else understands that. As I get older, I'm 67, that time is running out for me to know about some subjects. I've studied many things in my career, philosophy, theology. I've dabbled in other areas like jazz and so many things, philosophy of technology. But I'm 67. So as I look at all my books and my writing projects, I think, well, I don't have unlimited time in this life to study and to know things. So I need to study what needs to be studied, given my calling, given what needs to be done, given what people need to know. And I take heart that this is not all there is, that the redeemed will be with the Lord forever. And we will continue, I think, to study and learn and develop a creation for eternity. But in this life, we simply don't have the time to know as much as we may want to know. So those, I think, are four ways where the truth may elude us. And that's not a counsel of despair or pessimism. It's just the fact that we need to face the reality and then get into the zone where we can know as much as we need to know to glorify God and to fulfill our callings.
So, does the pursuit of truth involve character or virtue? Is that part of the equation of people who really truly want to pursue truth as you defined it?
Well, it does, definitely. We need virtues. A virtue is a right and good habit or disposition that we possess. They're moral and intellectual virtues. But to violate any virtue is wrong. And if we are not pursuing the truth about what matters, we should repent of that. We need to think well for the glory of God. And in fact, we should attempt to outthink the world for Christ. And I think of so many passages here, but Proverbs 8, 35 and 36, this is the wisdom of God personified and speaking. For those who find me find life and receive favor from the Lord. But those who fail to find me harm themselves. All who hate me love death. Or I think of Jesus' encouragement in Matthew 7, 7 and 8. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, and to the one who knocks, the door will be open. Or there are incentives also in the book of Ecclesiastes, where in chapter 1, verse 17, the preacher says, Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. Nevertheless, he goes on and says in chapter 7, Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter, as money is a shelter. But the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves those who have it. So we ought to pursue the truth about what matters, given our callings in life, and that requires certain virtues like intellectual patience, ardor, a zeal for what's true. I think it also requires courage to face difficult truths we would rather not face. So we ought to pursue the truth, and pursuing the truth takes certain virtues, and really the leading virtue is studiousness, or the willing to engage in thought to find out what the truth is. Another way of putting this is to attain the knowledge of the things that we ought to know. Knowledge is justified. true belief. And Scripture offers us the knowledge of God, of salvation, of ethics, and the late Vernon Rounds used to say Christians should be masters of one book, but readers of many. So we should fundamentally pursue the truth of what is taught in Holy Scripture, that we might live a life worthy of our calling and honor God and love our neighbor, and also have our apologetic chops in order to defend what the Scripture says and to explain it as best we can to the watching world.
Speaking of apologetic chops, how can the Christian apologist really talk to people who are swayed by social media influencers? So why should they look to pursue truth, as you said, for what matters? Because when you think about TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, it seems very in the moment, and thinking about things for what matters doesn't seem like it's very interesting, especially to younger people who are online natives.
Right. I think we can use some of those media in a truth conducive way. My social media manager has put clips of mine on Instagram, and that's certainly true of William Lane Craig and others. Of course, we want those to be incentives for people to read our articles and our books and to read Scripture. I don't want people to be satisfied with just a post that I put on X or an Instagram video. I want to draw people into other areas. So we can do something in those areas of social media, but to really live a deep life where we're seeking truth and coming to the knowledge of what matters ultimately, we need way more than that. We need time where we're reading books, having discussions, serious conversations with people about God and immortality and what is the good life and what does it mean to be a good citizen as a follower of Jesus Christ? What does it mean to be a godly person in the church? And that requires a lot more than reading X or watching Instagram videos. And here, education is so important in the church and everywhere else. We need to try to foster the love of learning in people. I've been trying to do this as a professor now, full time, for 31 years, and I'll be starting a new position at Cornerstone University this fall. One of the classes I'll be teaching is a class called Philosophy and Society, which is an introduction to philosophy. So I will be challenging these young Christian students, some of which are almost 50 years younger than I am, there's a frightening thought, to think well for the glory of God, to understand the history of ideas, to understand the basic claims of philosophy and how a Christian worldview is the best philosophy one could have, the most rational, the most supported by evidence, the most existentially significant. And I hope that I can instill in students, if they don't have it, not only a biblical worldview, but a love of learning, where if you are in agreement with reality, then you can have intellectual integrity in your intellectual pursuits. And a lot of these students will go on to become business people and perhaps lawyers or physicians or politicians or whatever they do. They should be studious people. They should be people that want to know what the truth is of Scripture, of their disciplines, and what it means to be a person of wisdom. So for wisdom, you need more than truth. You need to know what the truth is. You need to have knowledge, so reasons for your beliefs that are true. And then the wisdom dimension is putting it into effect in a godly way, whatever you may be doing. You may be a person who's an expert on administering social media. I have a social media manager who's a very astute, good man who helps me with that. Maybe you become an author. You might become an animal control person, whatever it is. You want to do all things to the glory of God and do this in a way that pursues the truth about what is pertinent to your situation, your calling.
Well, now, on a much lighter note, I have a question for Doug. Doug mentioned a few times that he is taking on a new position after more than 30 years at a different university. And I am just curious, because you also mentioned a few times that you're 67. What kind of quick advice could you give to our listeners, whether they are just graduated from college at 22 or they're almost retirement age, to make such a big change as something like doing a different job after more than 30 years?
Right. Well, I really don't believe in retirement. I think is something that one of my musical heroes, Duke Ellington, said. He was older, and someone asked him, well, Duke, you've done so much in music as a composer, pianist, band leader. When are you going to retire? And he said, retire to what? Music is my life. So he was involved with music right up until the very end of his life. Now, Duke Ellington was not a moral exemplar, but he was excellent at what he did in music. And I like that idea that you don't retire from what you love, and you don't retire from serving God. So as long as I can continue to teach and write and mentor, then I want to keep doing that. I don't want to retire from that. Now, I know some people work many years in jobs and they can be difficult and they don't spend as much time with their family as they would like. So I'm not saying that ceasing from full-time gainful employment is somehow wrong, by no means. But for me, really all that I know how to do, as I often say, is teach, preach, write, and mentor. So as long as I can do that, and if I can continue to do it at an institution and be paid for it, then I want to do that. I don't want to travel around the world taking cruises, although a nice jazz cruise might be nice at some point. I want to drive around the country in an RV. I don't golf. So I want to continue to do what I love that helps other people for as long as I can. And when I can't do that, then I'll need to stop. But I hope that's on my deathbed. I really hope I can continue to do these things as long as God gives me breath.
Well, thanks, Doug, for being a guest again on the Postmodern Realities podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to episode 401 of the Postmodern Realities podcast from the Christian Research Journal. Today's guest was Dr. Doug Groothius, and we were having a conversation about the nature of truth and how it works. He has written an online feature article for the Christian Research Journal for his Culture Critique column, and his article is called How Truth Works. And you can read it for free without a paywall at our website, equip.org. You won't want to miss out on subscribing to the other podcasts from the Christian Research Institute. We have the Bible Answer Man podcast, which is published Monday through Friday with the best of the week on Saturday. It's hosted by CRI President Hank Hanegraaff and is available wherever you get your favorite podcasts. In addition, Hank has a podcast called Hank Unplugged. Hank takes you out of the studio and into his study to engage in free-flowing, essential Christian conversations on critical issues with some of the most interesting, informative, and inspirational people on the planet. And you won't want to miss out on the brand new podcast from the Christian Research Journal. Christian Research Journal Reads presents audio versions of Christian Research Journal articles. It was a print incarnation of almost 45 years. It's now on the web, as you know, with new articles every single week. So you won't want to miss these audio articles of some of our most popular and most accessed articles on our website, equip.org.